Hello, welcome to Building SaaS with Python and Django. My name is Matt Lehman. I am the streamer for this stream, and we work on a Python Django application that I'm building. And I walk you through some things that I know about Python and just my process for doing development to give people a real view into what it's like to work on a real Python app. It's a chance for me to get work done on a project that I find enjoyable, exciting, and demonstrate to you all how to work with the Django web framework. The project is a homeschool application that I'm building, and tonight we're going to do some of the kind of bread and butter sort of stuff that you do in Django that as you're building out web applications, that they're pieces that are not like riveting. Hey, Osaida, welcome. Pieces that aren't like thrilling, but are critical to fleshing out a full application, just the stuff that you have to do every day. And then tonight we're going to work on one of those things. So this is the issue that we're going to be working on. And I will go ahead and show you where I'm at these days, because it has changed a little bit since last week. I mentioned on the last stream that I'm going to be continuing on this project even while not streaming. That's different from my last project. And the reason for that is because my wife, who is my customer for this project, is expressing interest in it, and I don't want to lose that momentum, I guess. So we will get going with the code here in a second, but I will take just a moment to fire up the local web server and show you where we're at today, so you can get a frame of reference for what we're going to be talking about. So let's open up the browser here and launch the app. I'm actually not seeing it on this constrained resolution for streaming, so it's a little different, or just a little tighter, but it's still going to get the job done. So where we were last time is working on this table, which is like the main view that shows all of the activities that need to be done for the week and highlights the day that we're currently on. I did note last time, this is Wednesday night when we're recording, but the time that I'm dealing with is in UTC. So it is Thursday over there in Europe, even if it's the wee small hours of the morning. So that's why the column is showing Thursday, in case you're curious. Where I need to go though is my wife wanted me to produce this week view. So this is kind of the overview of what my children will be doing for the week during their homeschooling education, but she needed a more practical daily view to have something that she could print out, have something that she could take action on. And so over the course of the last week, I've done a couple of things. One that you may notice if you joined last week is I added an actual bar of actions. A lot of these links don't do anything yet, but this button right here used to be up here near the logout button, and she just said, that's dumb. She needed to be clicking here. So I moved that down to this sub-nav bar. And I also created a few buttons for things that she's going to need in the future, but I wanted to add a little bit of the look and the feel to it, so to get her feedback and see if that was going to work. And she said, yeah, sure, it looks fine. I thought it looked kind of nice, but she's a little bit more critical than me, I guess. So the other thing we're doing here is this daily view. And the daily view is going to list, right now we only have my son's data in here, but it will list the activities for both of my children for the day, or in a far future, any user of the site, all of the students that are enrolled in that particular school year, it'll show their day's work. And the thing that she needed from the get-go was this ability to check these boxes of, yes, we did this thing today. There's a lot of things that need to be done, as you can see. School is a busy time. So I completed that functionality, and it's a fairly simple bunch of checks that you can hit complete, and all of these things will be marked as done for the day. But the thing that we need to work on today is over here on this button. And this is not going anywhere yet, but that's what we need to do. In her long-term vision that she presented to me, she needs to be able to modify daily activities. So in this example, you can see some stuff about art, and it's got page numbers 11 and 12 here. Well, it may not be a great example because it's only a couple pages, but you can imagine a reading assignment that's supposed to cover a range of pages. And what she told me is that in her current system, she will often get through a portion of the activity, and rather than like just claim that it's not done, she'll adjust the size of it in the text description. So she wants the ability to quickly make adjustments to the activities that are in the course, and so that's the goal of this button. So she would prefer to do it in line, but that's going to take time. And my goal right now is to get to the minimum viable product where she can actually start using it. And so she agreed that, yeah, if it has to be a button with a separate form for now, that's okay, and that's where we're going to start. So my goal, and what I've listed in this issue, is that I've already added the edit icon, as you can see, and now it needs to go to an actual edit form. So we need to do all the work to create the Django form that will power that. And I'm going to start out with no styling at all. It's going to be a ugly form. But the point is, if we accomplish everything that I set out to do tonight, it'll be click that button, take the user to the edit form, update the stuff about it. There's a couple of different fields. There's one is the actual description text, which is what you saw in that daily view. And the other thing is the duration of the task. That's for something else later when she's planning out the whole school year. But I want to be able to let her adjust the time as well, because an activity that she might have planned for 30 minutes maybe only took 15, and she wants to reflect that in terms of the amount of instructional time that she did. So that's the goal, is to I've called this model course task, and we need to be able to do that. So Django provides some ability to edit forms or provide editing forms that pretty directly correspond to a model record, and that's exactly the scenario we're in tonight. So let's go look at the model just so you are on the same page as me. So I've created an app, a Django app. Remember, project is the top, apps are the things below it as the components. And in my courses app, I have the course. And the course is a collection of tasks. So the course is really nothing more than a container that is meant to hold all these tasks. And that tiers up into a bunch of courses, make up a grade level, which then tiers up into a school year. So a school year has grade levels. Each grade level has courses that are there, and those things have tasks. So that's the basic overall flow. So what we have that is part of the course task is the foreign key back to the course. That's a critical step to define that kind of tree relationship. And then these other three pieces. I made this UUID as a tiny bit of forward-looking possibility. I'm not going to go into that right now. So just be blissfully ignorant of that. We are going to use it probably as the URL lookup of this rather than on the primary key of the model. But that's just a little side piece of this. So the thing that we want to do is we want to be able to make sure that this thing updates the description and duration. So how are we going to start? I think the first thing that I want to do is have a view that we can test against, which means we're going to need a URL that will connect to that view. And this time I will do this from a test-driven mode. So we're going to go up into the test directory of our courses area, and we haven't made any views yet here, so, or at least for this particular app. So I'm going to start by creating a test views file. And before I get going, I'm going to drop a couple notes in the chat. If you want to use the chat and ask me questions, please do. The purpose of this is to get some work done on our project, but also to answer your questions if you have them. So this is the issue we're working on, and we're doing a form view to do some editing of our course task model for this application. So I'm going to be truthful. I know there are features that we can use, and that they're these model form views, but I don't have a ton of experience using them. That's not been my main mode in the past. I think I've done things at a bit more of using the function and putting things together myself, but in this case, this model form view is the right fit for the kind of action that we're taking here. So I want to try and minimize the amount of extra code that I have to write, because as I said in the last stream, anytime you have to write a bit of code is a potential spot that something is broken because you can write the wrong code. And that goes for people that have been doing this for a long time. So we want to look up, the thing I'm going to search for is Django form views. And there are a bunch of them. And we're going to bring up this documentation. You can see here, here's the basic form that, and they even call it basic forms, how fitting. But there are other kinds of form views where you can connect a particular form class, which we can talk through, and you provide a bit of details and a template and go to town on it. And so using a variety of hooks that are defined for these classes, and hooks are just methods of a certain name that Django will look for, you can take action on it. So in the simplest case for a form view, where you have a form that you want to use, you can provide a form class, and form class itself will, by convention, have an isValid method. So what this form view will probably, well, not probably, will do somewhere under the covers is call form.isValid. And that validity check will check all of the fields that are defined in the form and compare them to the data that was posted in the request. And if the data meets the constraints of the form fields, then it declares that it's valid. So if it does so, it'll come in here, and in this example, it will send off some sort of email. So that's how this is working. But as we dig deeper into this, there are ways to kind of short circuit this even more. Take advantage of the fact that I can use the model to drive out not only just, I don't want to do a lot of this by hand, I guess is what I'm trying to get at, is I want to let the model define itself and say, here are the fields that I want you to infer from the model, knowing that my description is a text field or a character field, and my duration is an integer field. Make sure that those constraints stay true in creating the form that gets generated on the HTML side. So we're going to dig in, and again, I don't have a ton of experience with this myself, so I might have to stare and read some code for a minute, and we'll just do that together. I think the thing that I'm going for right now is I'm not looking to create tasks here, although ultimately I may use that as well, but I'm not sure. So I think what I want is this update view, but I'm not positive yet. But since I think it's the thing we want, let's jump to it and see what it says. So, a view that displays a form for editing an existing object, that's course tasks, and redisplaying the form with validation errors, okay, and saving changes to the object. Okay. This uses a form automatically generated from the object's model class, which is the scenario we're talking about. And you can see that there are a lot of pieces and components that are pulling this all together. So let's look at an example and see if we can follow along. And just do the stupid thing first, because that's what we really care about. So, looks easy enough. Let's figure out what this template name suffix thing is. I don't understand that. The UpdateView displays a GET request. Okay. So it's looking for a particular template name format. So I think if I don't define one, it's going to blow up at me. So I'm actually going to deliberately leave off the template, and I want to watch it fail. That's the goal. The other thing I want to do about this that I'm not sure how to do yet, or what's not clear about this, is I want to hook this up to a URL, and they're talking about making the view and making the template, but they're not talking about how to do the actual model lookup via the URL. So maybe we need to jump back a little bit. Maybe it's defined somewhere earlier. Well, I don't see it. Okay, so let's just start and hack at it and see how to get it going. So the thing we need to start with is the courses URLs file, which doesn't even exist yet. So let's actually go back to the project URLs file. And currently, I have a limited set of things. So there's stuff for account management. There are these main daily and week views, which I put into, since they're like the central pulling together views of the whole app, I've put them into core. But now we're in a scenario where I want to hang thing off of courses. So we're going to do that right here. And I want to kill the server over here because we don't need it for now. So I want this stuff to hang off of courses. And when I say hang, I just mean that it's going to be my website / courses / and then all the other views that I want to use are going to be under that. So this is just giving a home for the collection of views that will be any course related views. So we need to change this import path, which is a module path, to a file that doesn't exist yet. We're going to change it from core to courses, like so. And then we're going to go back to the courses app area, and I'm going to create a file here called urls.py. And from this, ultimately, I know we're going to need a variable named URL patterns. That is what Django is going to look for to find the routes to define this stuff. And what else do we need? We need a test. Let's do that. Let's do this from a test-driven style. I think that will be good. So let's go to courses test test models. I did create the file, so we have it over here. And I'm going to say from homeschool.test. I made a generic, a default test case that that my code can import. So we need to import that test case, and then we're going to subclass it. And I'm going to say test course. What will this thing be called? It'll be the course task update view. It's a bit verbose, but I sometimes favor verbosity because it's explicit over being shorter, just because we can be shorter. And the first thing we need to do is test the get. So if we have a course task, part of this is going to be testing that it fills out a form and that the form has all the necessary bits that we want to test. So it's going to need to, part of that form will need a description and it will need a duration. And then we'll test the post as the kind of the second half for the saving. So we'll make sure that it saves and updates and the data is changed. So I'm going to say test get. It's probably a very generic name, but that's okay. And the thing that we want to test is against a course task. So we're going to need a course task. And I'm just going to call it task, actually, because sometimes I do like to be shorter. Hey, I'm not internally consistent. Go figure. And I'm using factory boy factories, so those are defined in a factory files that I created. And so I put those in the tests area in a factories module. And we want to import the course task factory. And what a factory does, if you have not seen them before, is it creates a database record. So it does the actual building based off of some rules that you provide. So if for example, you need a foreign key to a course, you provide a sub-factory. So it says, oh, I have a foreign key constraint. I know I'm going to need a course. Let me go call that other factory to create a course. And it will kind of keep going up until it completes everything it needs to make a valid database record that can be used for the test. And because of the way the testing is set up, between each test, it's just going to wipe all that stuff out. So I'm just building up enough test data for the test, and then it all gets torn down so that the next test is not depending on any of that test data. So we have our course task. The other thing that we're going to need is the URL that we want to test against. I'm going to use ultimately the client, and Well, hold on. I'm getting ahead of myself. There is a what is it? It's Django Test Plus, and I think it's a really cool tool, and I keep forgetting how to use it. So it's adding some stuff to the default Django test case to make it easier to test, but it sort of depends on remembering the methods. So I think what I want to do here is do this get approach, and we're going to need to do this from a logged in user as well. So that's going to be important. So we can get a user from this tool by calling a little factory function that Test Plus provides called make user. And when we do this get, it's going to be important that the user is logged in. So we can say self user login as this decorator that Test Plus provides, and then we're going to say response self get, and here's where we give it the URL name. And this hasn't been created yet, but this is going to be in the courses namespace. And what name should I give this? Course task edit? I don't know. Should I, and here's a good question. Should I use underscores or dashes? I think there's debate on that. I'm going to use underscores to kind of stick with a Python style, but I don't have a lot of, you can go either way. It doesn't really matter as long as you're consistent in your naming is probably the preferred approach. Well, not probably, that is the preferred approach. And the other thing we need to give it is I'm going to make sure that this URL takes a UUID, because I want the ultimate view that any user would come to is my website / courses / tasks / some long UUID for that specific task, and that will bring them to the edit page. So in order to do that, we're going to give a keyword argument of task.uuid, and that's the factory gave us a UUID to work with, so that should all work. And what do we want out of that? We want to check that it returns a 200. So there's actually a little convenience method that we can do that's even better than get. In this scenario is get check 200. So it does the actual assertion for you as well. So let's say get check 200, and I think if we do that, we don't even need the response right now, because Test Plus will be checking the status code on the response under the covers. Okay, so this should blow up spectacularly because we're doing a little bit of test-driven development here, and it does. It says it's a 404 rather than 200, so it couldn't find the view, which makes perfect sense because we didn't define it yet. So let's come up here, and we're now in, if you look in my Vim bar at the bottom there, you can see we're in courses URLs. So we need to, from Django dot, drawing a blank, Django URLs, import path. It's funny because I just literally wrote a blog post about this. Have I always used Django? No, I have not always used Django. In fact, I have used a wide variety of things. Let's talk about them for a moment. And we can talk about some of their pros and cons too, I guess. So I have used professionally, I have used Django, of course. I have done some work using Flask. I have done work with Pyramid. I've done work with Turbo Gears. I've done work with Bottle. I've done work with Twisted. And that's just Python. So, and then we get to other languages, and I've done, if we're talking C#, I've done work with ASP.NET MVC and some Java, various Java frameworks that I can't remember. So when you have done industry work for I don't what like 15 years now or something like that. You get around the block, I guess, and you start to get experience with different frameworks. Um, I do have thoughts on other frameworks. I'm not like a I like Django. I'll come right out and say that I think Django is pretty great for what it does. I like that it has that batteries included model because it means that I don't have to build a bunch of things myself. I've just grown to appreciate that, um, and not because I think that Flask is bad, for example, but just out of a pure like laziness aspect. It's nice to not have to think about where you're gonna get something from. Like it's just me remembering the proper import path in Django rather than if in fact, as we're going to get farther in here and start using forms, the Flask out of the box experience doesn't have a forms library built in. So if you're starting a new project, the moment you want forms, well, now you got to go get probably what the forms, WT forms is the one that I have commonly seen used, which I'm sure is also a good package, but it just means you have to now add that extra thing. Some people like going with that mode where they are starting with the absolute minimal thing and just building up and building up, and that's cool. That's one way of working. I have taken to the approach where I'd rather just have it there, and if I'm not using it, I'm not using it. So it's not like I'm paying some kind of big penalty for it because it's not really being imported. I mean, there might be a tiny performance startup penalty, but nothing enough to notice. I will say that having used, yeah, it's. I'm glad you're enjoying the stream. There, we're people are all different, right? And I've come to accept that, like, even among programmers, like you might encounter people that really like doing a lot of modeling and high level thinking, and you'll encounter some other programmers who love to get down deep into the guts of stuff and look at the very small details of something. For instance, interestingly enough, I grew up in the same neighborhood as the maintainer of Memcached. He's a good friend of mine, and I know him, and I knew him when he was in high school and younger, and he was the kind of guy, like in his room, we'd like hang out and play video games and stuff. But in his room at that time, he had volumes, and this was back a long time ago. I'm getting old, so but he had like big volumes of C and C++ books, and he just loved getting into that nitty gritty stuff. And for him, that's what programming is, and that's exciting. For me, not my favorite. Like not all the time. Like I do enjoy some of it, and I've been getting more into Rust and stuff. But I also enjoy staying with these high level things and thinking about solving kind of domain problems in these and in ways that solve business needs. So that's what I find interesting. So everybody has their own path, I guess, is the point. And I'm not going to fault anybody for what they choose. So if you're powering on with Flask, more power to you. So we're going to create getting back to this here, I guess, we're going to create a path instance, and that is a kind of a route for our system. And I said I wanted it to be at tasks. Again, this is going to be courses, tasks, and then the UUID. So we need a UUID, and we're going to use a Django converter. And one of the built-in converters is UUID, and the converter type is on the left side of the colon. I guess that's over here for you folks. And the variable name that you want to give it is on the right side. So what will get passed into the view is the thing that goes on the right side of the colon. And so even though it looks like I'm repeating the same thing, one side is the converter type, one side is the name. Hopefully that makes sense. So that's our converter. And what a converter means in this context is it will try and parse out a string that looks like a UUID and convert it into a UUID instance that it can pass into the Django function that's going to handle this. And so the second piece that we need here is so we also need the from the, I'll do a relative import the views here. So that's saying like look in the current package and look at your siblings, I guess that's the right relationship, and find a module that has the name views. And so that will give us the views.py file. which is currently empty, but we're going to populate in a second. And I said I wanted to call this thing the course task update view. And we'll say as view, because this will be a Django class-based view. And we need to give it a name, and the name is going to be that longer name that I gave it a second ago of course task edit. And I think that should do it for our path. Now, what I have not done yet is give this this application an app namespace. I need to say app name of courses, and that's what will allow this colon syntax. Okay. So when we run the test, and this is going to blow up again. It's going to blow up because there is no view there. So we need to make that. So let's go do that. I think that if I did that right, that should be the extent of the URLs file that we have to touch. I may have not done it right though. But make a first attempt. So we need this update view here. So Django views generic edit update view. Edit update view. Yeah, that looks right. And I'm going to do course task update view, and it's going to subclass from update view. I'm going to see how far this will take us. What I'm doing is I'm using test-driven development to pull out the next thing that I need to do, because I have full expectation that this is wrong. There's stuff that's missing here yet. There's no template that we've defined. We've not pointed it to a model. And what I like about Django is it has enough checks in place to say, hey, you're going to need a model if we're going to infer what the type is, so you need to give us one. But I suspect that it's going to tell us, yep, it's improperly configured. We're missing a query set. So we either need to define a query set. This is actually informative. It's kind of an interesting way to learn the documentation too. In this circumstance, what do I want? Ooh, that's a good question. I want to scope this. This ultimately needs to be protected to tasks that the user is allowed to look up. So, think about this long term. Like this system will be a multi-tenant system. There will be more than one user on here, and we don't like as hard as it is to get a UUID figured out. Like it's basically impossible. I still want to provide protections and authentication checks in place, so that you can't just get anybody's course task, because who knows what they're doing, and users, I think, deserve some amount of privacy. So I could just do this model here and say course task, but I think what I want to do is do it from the query set. And this is going to be a little tricky, maybe not. I should probably think about what I'm talking about. So I want to get the query set from a filtered view of the course tasks where I pass in the user. So this is, its course task is at kind of at the bottom, and then we have to go up to course and up to grade level and up to school year and up to school, and then you can get the admin from the school. That kind of actually sounds horrible. So I don't know that I actually, because I think what that's going to do as a query is a bunch of different kinds of joins. Oh, I don't know. Let's go check it out. This will be interesting, I think. It'll be interesting for me at least. So you get to come along for the ride, whether you want to or not. Well, no one's keeping you here, so you can bail if you so choose. So let's say get query set, and the query that we want is going to be from course task, and we're going to use the manager to, and that's how you generate query sets in the standard way. And I want to filter and I want the filter to pull from the user out. And so this is where I'm making an assumption here. I'm assuming that getQuerySet is called after the user has been added to the class-based view. I think it's a pretty valid assumption, but we'll check it out. So the request gets attached to a class-based view during the sequence of the call. So you should be able to get out a user by saying self request user, because that gets added by a chunk of middleware, I believe. And if we're going to go up the chain to figure out if this particular user has the ability to look at it, so we would do that by saying course, that's the foreign key in the course task. And if you went to look at the course model, you would find that there's a grade level. And if you went to look at the grade level, you would find that there's a school year. And if you went to look at the school year, you'd find that there's a school. And in the school, there's an admin. And the admin, I used admin as in like a school administrator. I probably should have written out administrator, but I didn't. And so actually, it's not a string, sorry. It's some of the Django ORM trickery here. So then we would pass in this user, and that would give us our tasks query set, because a filter is not returning a single instance, it's returning a bunch of them. And so that you use the variable names that you should apply should be in the plural form. But it's not been evaluated yet, but it is the thing that we want to return, is tasks. So I'm putting this here. We also, I guess, need to give this the self parameter because, hey, this is a method and not a function. And we also need to give this the course task, which is going to be found from a relative import of models. And we're going to import course task. Okay. So what I'm really curious about in this process, because I still believe this is going to fail, but I want to print out the tasks query and see what that is going to do, because it may prove that this is too big of a query, going up too many levels, but it may be way smarter than I can figure and doing something more intelligent. Let's try running the test and see what happens. Okay, so okay, we need to, so we're gonna have to go look up the generic view class probably. And yeah, because that's coming from there. So that's another problem we'll get to in a second. Let's focus on the query though. So I printed out the query, and this, actually, let's go back here. Anytime you do a query set and you have to be in debug mode, I don't remember, but you can take a query set and you can call this .query attribute on it, and you can print that. And what Django will do is provide the text representation of the query that's going to send to your database engine. Now, in fairness, this is like perhaps slightly different because locally I'm doing stuff in SQLite rather than Postgres. So it's going to be a little off, but you can see I'm doing 1, 2, 3, 4 inner joins. I honestly don't know if, I don't know MySQL well enough to know if that's going to be good or bad. Can't imagine it's going to be good, but at the same time, I'm not sure I care. I want to avoid the temptation of over-optimizing at this early stage in this project, especially if it's a query for one record out of a database. I think that's okay, because all of these are going to be foreign keys, so they're all going to be indexed. So I think it's going to be fast enough, is I guess my point. So that's going to be our query set, and that's going to give us the protection that, in fact, in the long run, this may error, because what's going to happen is I've said make a user, but I didn't connect that user to this task. So in effect, what I've done is exactly the scenario that I said I was trying to protect against, where one user is accessing someone else's task. So in reality, what I need to do is all of that same shenanigans in my factory and pass that user there. So now what I'm doing is connecting the user that is going to get logged in here to the task. And alternatively, if I didn't care to use this make user function, the factory by default would try to be creating a user for me. So I could have, instead of doing self.login user, I could have said task.course.grade level ... etc. But the downside of that approach is that my test would actually get a tiny bit slower because each of those dots would do a separate database lookup because I didn't do a select related on them. You don't care. Okay, we've got our query set. And now we need to go look into the other half of this. What I was complaining about is, it's saying you either need a PK or you need a slug. And that's just the default configuration for generic views. And that's how it's trying to do the lookup in the URL. And I've got to believe that I don't have to believe, I know for a fact that there is a way to change that. I just don't remember how. So we need to find the proper view to, maybe it's a single object mixin. Okay, so provides a mechanism for looking up an object associated with the current HTTP request. That sounds like us in this context. And it's the one doing the model and query set stuff. And the name of the URL conf keyword argument that contains the primary key. Well, we're not really interested in primary key. We're interested in UUID, which is not the primary key. Let's keep going, seeing if there's other ways to do this. Because I could provide a slug field probably, but that's going to do a different kind of lookup is my guess. We don't want this setting because we don't want to look up on primary key and slug field. The name of the field on the model, it contains the slug. A slug, if you don't know, is like this newspapery lingo of, say, example.com/articles and, I don't know, big news headline. I'm going to avoid today's political shenanigans because I don't want to touch that with a 10-foot pole. So in that example, this big news headline piece, the hyphenated part is the slug of that. It's just a convention that gets used a lot on websites. And because Django actually came out of the Lawrence Journal world in Kansas, slug got incorporated as something that's baked into the framework. So if we said slug, it might not do what we want it to do. So I'm trying to figure out, all right, let's do another search because this is not going as well as I want to. So Django generic view by UUID. Let's see if something comes up. Hey, how about that? That looks like us, right? How to use a generic view with a UUID instead of PK. Cool. Oh, well, that's easy. Is it? Slug keyword arg must match your URL regex group. I think it does. I think it should. We're not using regex, but we're using Django's new converter pattern. So if we change this and do, yeah, they said slug keyword arg, slug URL keyword arg. And if we change that to UUID, that should now correspond to the field that's in that URL file. I'm being clear as mud, so here we are. Sorry. We've got the UUID here. This should be the name. And if I'm reading that Stack Overflow article, that should do it. Okay. Cannot resolve keyword slug into field. Okay, so we must be missing a separate setting. So I noticed that there was the slug URL keyword arg, but there's also slug field. Yep, okay. We need to set slug field as well to be UUID. What I'm not sure of what it's going to do here is if it's going to do it on the right type. Because that's a different error. Because when we are using this converter, the converter's job is to convert. It's to convert a string that comes in on the HTTP request into the data type, the native data type. So if this were for something simpler, it was an int, an integer, then then if you had 42 as your string in the URL, it would take that and do a cast with the int built-in function so that you would get an int to work in your function rather than dealing with the conversion and the casting yourself. Similarly, UUID should be doing the same thing. What's unclear to me is that if I define these this way, is it going to do proper checking on the UUID type? I'm not really sure. I'm going to operate under the assumption that it will, and if it does, cool, go Django. But I don't know. So now we have the way to do the lookup, the query set that filters to our special user here. And the other thing it was complaining about was missing fields. And so we're asking to do a form, and that form is going to update certain fields. And you have to be explicit about it because it's not going to infer, because some of those fields you may not want to change. So we have to specify them. And it's not going to be here, it's going to be back at our update form. Search for fields. There's a way you can specify like all of them, like maybe with dunder all, a string called dunder all or something like that, but that's not what we want. We want fields to be the description and the duration. So as a last bit of stuff here, we'll add the list of description and duration. So what happens now? Getting there. As a form, filter the input fields after the validate function. That's a good question. Can you expand on that, XD? What do you mean by filtering in this context? Because there's a system. I asked that because the system that they have in place is called cleaning, and so during the validation check, it will run all these like clean methods on it to do any additional validation that you might have. It does some built-in validation there, again, to check like data types and stuff. If you're passing in, if you have a declare a choice field in your form, which is not something I've talked about yet, but a certain type of form field, and you pass in an invalid choice, it won't validate. And so it will do that filtering for you and not even get to your, like what is valid is doing. It won't even get to the state where it's calling your valid function to fill out. So in that scenario, like a user does a post request to your form, and somehow they've submitted bad data. And so this update form is going to call form.isValid, and internally isValid is going to check each form field type, and we'll check it for its type, check that it passes certain constraints. Then it will look for certain method names on your form class called clean underscore whatever the form field name was. So like if I needed to clean up the description, for example, that I have in this form, I would write a def clean underscore description method. And that's a hook that I can use to add custom logic to my forms. Hey, 25 clocks. Cool, glad you're here. So does clean data? No. Good point. No. I think that we'll do some basic stuff, but for instance, let's say you provide oh darn is right. If you provide data that you're going to turn around and display to the user, Django will try and help you by default. Like in the actual template display, let's say you're not being very careful and you're trying to, like an old MySpace site where you're trying to style it or something like that, and you're trying to display your custom HTML. What Django will do is if you make no modification, it will say that everything that looks like an HTML tag, so like less than, greater than stuff, it will do what's called HTML escaping. So if you were actually to view the source code, what you would see rendered on the page will look like the literal less than and greater than character rather than some HTML rendered. But if you looked at the source of that page, with view source, you would see ampersand LT semicolon ampersand GT semicolon as those are called HTML escapes. And so it's doing that to protect you, because if somebody is nefarious and you didn't design your site really well and they add in a script tag, they could execute arbitrary code for either their own page, or more cleverly, if it's a page that gets viewed by others. Like let's say hypothetically you're building a terrible bulletin board system or a terrible forum, and anything that you post to this forum can be viewed publicly. And if you don't do a good job of handling that safety stuff, somebody being terrible could add a script that then will be run and executed by any other person that happens to view that page. So that's bad news. So you get these HTML escapes by default in Django to help protect you against that. But there is a way to tell Django, no, seriously, I really want you to show this as raw data because this is trusted. But you have to make sure that you've done your job of trusting that yourself. And a popular tool to do that is called Bleach. It's from Mozilla, and what it does, its job is pretty simple but really cool, is it will strip out stuff. And here's that example of, like, you don't want this script tag calling what they've called an evil function. So Bleach has this clean stuff that can turn that into the HTML escapes to make it basically safe. There's also options to call clean with like strip. So if it found any script tags of anything kind of nasty and nefarious, it'll just remove anything that looks like a script tag. So that's an extra tool that you can add to Django if you're dealing with untrusted user input that you're planning to echo back in some sort of live way. But just be careful with that stuff. But it's good to know what Django does and doesn't do. So thanks for the question. So continuing on here, we now need to make a form. Yeah, well, yes, I think so. Definitely use Bleach. It's a good tool. So to finish this off, we need a form, and that will get us, I think that will get us a full end run. You're welcome. To prove that this test gets a 200 response. And that's kind of cool. That's where we want to be. So I'm going to go to my templates area, and I don't think I even have a courses directory yet. So we need to create a courses directory. And I'll do that right here in Vim. And the name of that file was course task. So what it's doing is figuring out that it's using the course task model. It's giving the default name to it. So it was course task underscore form HTML. By having just that much, now we've defined a form. I've saved the file. So if we run the test again, awesome. That only took an hour to get a basic view going. But I think I did a lot of explanation along the way. So such is life. So what have we done so far? We have, I don't know. So the course task update view will handle all of the processing. And it will basically, if we give it a UUID now, it will do the filter to make sure you're the right person. And if you're not, then it's going to say, nope, you're not going to get in here. You're going to get a 404. Actually, now that we're at this point, we're not looking at that query anymore. So let's just simplify that code a little bit. So the protection's in place, the lookup's in place. We have not actually made the template. So even though the code is there, the Python code is there that will power this properly, we need to fill out the template. And that's probably going to be where we can look at this next. But before we do that, let's write a couple more tests. So I want to do two tests. I want to test this logic over here about doing this actual request. I want to also deal with, well, we can make sure that this view is a login view. So I have another test file in core test views over there. And so test plus gives us this assert login required, and that should fail right now. So let's change it to use the same task from above and delete all that stuff. We don't need that part. Okay, courses, course edit, or course task edit, and pass in the UUID task UUID. So that's going to give us the valid URL. I think this might fail right now. Yeah. So it's giving a pretty nasty error, and it's predictable because what I did is what's happening in this view that's wrong, that I'm trying to highlight with this test, is that this user can be an anonymous user, and an anonymous user is not a real database record. It doesn't point to a row in the database in the user table. It points to a class that's meant to kind of masquerade as a user, but whenever you check the isAuthenticated method on it, it's going to come back and say false. So by passing that as a filter here, that's wrong. And that's what we're seeing blow up. So what we really want is, now that we have this test, we can go look at the views file, and I can show you the decorator that we need to use. So there's this decorator that's defined in the contrib package. Okay, and we can add it to our view. So this is a decorator. Well, it's not a decorator. I'm sorry, it's a mixin class. I'm used to the function-based views where you use a decorator. But what this will do is it will do the check on the user before it even gets this far into the get query set method, so that we can have confidence that by the time we pull out the user here, this should always be an authenticated user. And if not, they're going to get redirected to a login page, which is what happens when you have the login required mixin. So now if we test this, hey, it works. It has checked it against the anonymous user and found that it doesn't work and redirects the proper way. So we have that test. That's good. That's one level of confidence. The next test that I want to do is that other scenario where we have our one user and we have one task and they're not the same user. So it should return a 404, I believe is what we're going for. So, so we'll say test get other user. And we will steal this code from here, paste it in, and delete all the stuff in the quotes there. So now that guarantees that the task and the user are different. And we'll take these two lines, although it's not going to be checking for 200. Now we're just going to do the get call. And then Test Plus has some other helpers that will help us here. So, okay. So you get the response object and you pass it into one of these things. So I think what I want, and this is just kind of a shorter wrapper around checking the status code directly. So let's say self response, I believe this should be a 404 because the user won't be able to see it. We need the response, which means that we need to assign the response like that. And that passed. Great. So now what? Now we want to, let's finish the cycle. So we've got a, I think we can test that all of this functionality will work. And then I think all that will be left for us to do is to check or write the template. Sorry, blanked out for a minute there. So we'll say test post. That's the other half of this. And I want to post and modify both the description and the duration. And I don't know that I'm going to bother to do a bunch of validation checking right now. I don't think that that's super interesting work to tackle at this first go. So let's take this. It's the same basic setup. We need to be logged in, but we're not doing a get check 200. We're going to do a post. And so we're going to need post data. And I'm going to also want to give specific description and duration fields numbers for the original task so that I can, with confidence, say that it has changed. So I'm going to add here as my description, if I can type properly, of, I'll be nice and boring tonight, of some description. And the duration will be 30 minutes. So what we want to do is we want to post a data payload that will have the fields that are going to be generated by the form and expected by the update view. So that should be description, and we'll say new description, and duration, and I believe, now, do I want to give it a string of a number or the actual number itself? I don't know. I'm just going to give it the actual number itself for the moment. And then we're going to pass that in to the post as the data. And what that should do is say that the post will start to work with this as the form data. What will happen after this point is a bit of a mystery to me. So we'll assert the response status code, and I'm doing this temporarily. I don't think this is the long-term thing. Assert the status code is 200. let's see if that's right or wrong. Because I kind of expect that after you do a post that you actually want to redirect somewhere new. Because with posting, like there's this danger if you just reload the page and then somebody hits refresh, then you're actually going to, I think, issue the same call again or something like that. Or it's possible to, sometimes you see this weird, are you sure you want to resubmit this form message on the browser? And that's what kind of what this scenario is talking about. So the way to get around that is actually to do a redirect to a new page. And ultimately, what my wife really wanted anyway was exactly that. So if we come back to the actual app view, I'm going to change, so this edit button doesn't go anywhere, but I'm going to make it link to that update view. And I'm also going to add a get query parameter, something like next, that will provide the link back to this page so that her flow could be edit, make the changes, and then it gets dumped right back to where she started, and hopefully we'll see the change because it's been persisted. So that's what I'm going for ultimately, but that's going to take a little bit more work. We're just trying to get the form working first. And good, we're hitting the next improperly configured set. So we either need to provide a URL or define get absolute URL. I don't want to do this one. That's not what I'm interested in today. That's not where we're going. So we need to do this first half and look up how to do that on the generic view editing. So we don't want the absolute URL. Where do we go? Well, it's not on this page, so let's look at the generic display views. It might be over here. Or it might be on the form view, yeah, in fact. Probably there, actually. This is, I do like this part of Django. I know I'm kind of sighing, but it's nice that Django has these features, but it's hard to keep track of them all. There's a lot of them. In fact, I think there's like a whole special site just devoted to all the different class-based views and how to learn all the things you'd want to learn. You've got this. Is it the get success URL? Maybe is where we need to go. Okay, let's do another search. So Django form view get success URL. I think you can define it as like a class field attribute, or you can define it as a function, and that's what we're going to want, because remember I just said that I want to be able to look up from a get query parameter what the next view is. So I'm either going to send them back to the current page, like, because to date there is no way to look at just the task page. So if somebody happened to go there without coming from a different view or are just directly looking at it, then we need to be able to send them somewhere. Otherwise it's going to be this improperly configured thing. But that's really long-term not where I want to go. So here you can see there's a success URL attribute on this form view, on the form mixin, but I think down here you can add a whole URL. So let's do that first. So the default case will be def get success URL, and it's going to take self, and it's going to return the reverse on itself, right? So the course task edit, and what do they call that? I think it's object. So when all this processing is handling, and we've got this query set here, but it's ultimately going to be working with a single instance, right? So if you think about this, it takes the URL that comes in and it gets a UUID, and it's going to take the query set that's here of the tasks and do a get on the UUID. But to do the processing internally, it has to store that model record somewhere on the class. And I think by default, it stores it in this generically named object. I believe that's the case. If I'm wrong about that, we'll go correct it, but I think that's the right thing. So if it's already done all of the processing, the object is sitting there and the UUID hasn't and won't change. So if we're going to send it back to the same exact page, we will use self.object.uuid. So we need also the reverse method, and that is in from Django URLs import reverse. And okay, what is that doing now? Oh, ouch. The URL conf. Whoops, that's not right. Oh, it's supposed to be a keyword argument. So UUID, is that right? Oh, oh, come on. One of the most basic tools, and I don't remember how to use it. I think it might be, okay, we have to pass it in as keyword args. See if we can, yeah. Okay, so it's keyword args equal UUID, and the other side is like that. Okay, I think that should be right now. And this test code is not being helpful. It's because it's not telling us the status code that it was. Probably a 302. This is where something like PyTest is more helpful because you don't have to guess. That value of that variable is known. But thankfully I knew that this was going to do a redirect, and the HTTP 302 is the redirect status code. Okay, so we have proven, nope, we haven't proven anything yet. All we've proven is that it's redirecting somewhere. So we need to take our task and, oh, you know why I did that silly assertion is because I'm assuming that I'm in PyTest, but I'm not. So really I need to do assert equal to that thing, but that's not what I want to do. So we want to say, like we did a moment ago, self response, and this time we're going to use 302 and pass it the response object. So now it's doing a proper, it would have failed in a more meaningful way if we'd seen that. So I want to do task refresh from DB. That refresh from DB method is saying go back to the database and get the latest data. And so if this view did its job, it should have persisted what we had in the data form. And we want to say that we want to check, hey, Hunter, welcome. We want to check that the task description is the same as what was posted in the data. So that should be this guy. Oops. Okay. Yeah, man, I am too. Play some video games, that'd be fun. Come in to watch me code on Twitch. Hunter's someone I've known for quite a long time. We go hang out, play video games every once in a while. So I'm finishing off this test. We're gonna check on the duration too, although it should be right as well, since the description also proved to be correct. Okay, there we have it. We've got what have we done? We now have a test case that checks a handful of things. It checks that you have to be authenticated. You have to be logged in as the user that is associated with the task. So that means some Joe random user can't jump over and look at your stuff, even if they could manage to figure out what the UUID for your task is, which is almost impossible. But offering those extra protections is good. So we wrote a test to check that, and it was correct. And then we did a final test to do the post. But this is only like the processing side of the story. So the display side of this still looks like just rubbish. So let's prove that. Let's go back to our main daily view. Like I said, this is going to be that edit icon that's over here. Let's go ahead and connect that. So all of these things should be able to connect to an edit view that's going to go to that page that we showed. And right now you'll see, once we hook it up, it will just look terrible. So on the daily HTML template, which, oh my gosh, you can't see because it's so big. There we go, that's better. We can now find that area that had that edit icon and hook it up to something real. And so I'm in the matrix here, and so all I see is a beautiful pencil edit icon. No, I'm just kidding. So I have some inline SVGs rather than file names. So where is the edit icon? Oh, I have, that was the edit icon. I just have temporarily hooked it back to the same view. So we need to change this URL, this core daily thing to what it really needs to be. So it needs to be now courses, and we call that course task edit. And the thing that's going to be passed into it is UUID, and in the context here, that is set to course schedule task UUID. Okay. And then there are a couple types of icons in here for different reasons that I don't need to remind people of right at the moment. But so we need to essentially replicate that as here as well. So courses, course task edit, and we are going to say the same thing, UUID, but this time it's going to be coursework dot course task UUID. Okay, so let's do a refresh on this page, and I can't because I killed the server a while ago. And now let's refresh the page. And if you look at, I don't know how well y'all can see that, but at the bottom of my browser there it's showing a preview for what the link is. And these links aren't going to be pretty at the start. And so I have a feeling I'm going to get a piece of feedback that says, can you make the links prettier? And I can, and I will, because that's what my lovely bride wants. Did I spell course wrong? Really? I hope not. That would be embarrassing. Courses? Well, maybe I did. I just can't see it, Hunter, so you'll have to point it out to me if I'm wrong somewhere specifically. So on this current page, we have in the code. Oh, you're right. That was we were going to get to that. Thank you. In fact, let's go do that now. So all of this is for coursework that's completed or is to be completed, sorry. So let's go ahead and mark this as a done thing and hit complete. And that'll save it and create a coursework. And now, boom, now we've got that bug in the code that Hunter, Eagle Eye Hunter saw there. So course task now is set that way. And if I should refresh, it should do a proper lookup if I did it right and spelled it correctly this time. Hey, cool. So like I said, there were two different places, and this is it's the showing up as the same icon, but they're representative of different chunks in the Django template. So on this unfinished item, it's showing up as this way, and now on the completed item, it's showing up the same way. They're both going to the same place at this point, but through slightly different paths depending on whether the work was done or not. So good eye, Hunter. So I'm going to uncheck that for the moment just to keep the data at the state it was in. And we come over here. Now we see that there's nothing in here. So now it's time to go and do a teeny bit of styling. And I probably won't drag that on too much longer. We'll just add in just enough so you see what it's going to do. And we can drop in Django's default version of this thing, so you can see just the basic built-in version of it. But we're not going to keep that version because it doesn't play nicely with Tailwind styling. So let's go over to course task form. And the first thing I want to do is extend from my app base view. So we say extends, and then we say app, I think it's app base. We'll find out again if I'm wrong. And so now we've got all the Chrome around everything. So that's all the template work that's there. And so this stuff is going to go in a main block, and we can compare it to the daily HTML so you can see what I'm talking about. So at the top here, we need to set the title for this task probably. And then we need to define a block. That's where the actual form is going to be going. So let's do the easy one of the title that goes on the top. And you actually won't be able to see the title because I know the way I set up my stream, I have a bar that's going across the actual top of my browser. Although I'll bring it down and I'll let you all see it. So we just want to say, what do I call this? For now, I'll just be really dumb and just say edit course task. It'll be totally impersonal, but who cares? And if my wife doesn't like it anyway, she'll tell me that. So now if we refresh this, oh, I should have waited to hold off on the refresh. So hopefully now you can see all of my tabs that are up as I'm jumping around. So let's show it with the different view. So by default, my base template says homeschool app. I haven't given this project a name yet. I haven't bought a domain. There's none of that. So that's just the default. So anytime I want to give a new view or a new template a different title, I need to define this block, and it will override the default. So if I refresh again, now it says edit course task, which is the action that we want to take today. So coming back over to the template, we'll add another block, and that block will be main. And main is just the spot in the template that I have to add extra styling. So let's see it in action. We'll just say hello from course task edit. And we'll see how unlovely that is. So the way Tailwind works is it starts with very minimal styles. So there's nothing about this style that is nice yet. It's not responsive. It doesn't do anything. It's just stripped down to the studs and just the data, which is fine. But you can see the main box that I'm using exists within already some padding around it. So there's already an appropriate amount of space between that and the sub-navigation. There's already an appropriate margin on the left and on the right side if I wrote it big enough. And so the form is just going to drop in right here. And because I think this will ultimately be a temporary form that my wife will use, I'm not going to go hog wild with the styling of it. It's not going to be super fancy. I'm going to probably say something like edit course task, and it will have the course, the name of the course that it's associated with as a non-editable piece of information, because that's not going to change. She's not going to take a task made for math and drop it in science. At least that's not a use case that I'm aware of today. But then it will list a text box that will have the description, another box that will have the duration, and we'll throw in a button to say update or save or something like that. So Django does provide tools that, let's make this taller again. Does provide the tools to make forms quick to render, and it's this form as P thing. In fact, I'm just going to take this whole thing. That should be even sufficient enough. Come back over here and check that out. So you can't, it's really, really hard to see right now because again, Tailwind has stripped out all the styling on purpose so that it will work as consistently across browsers as possible. But this right here is an editable text box. You can tell because there's a tiny little handle over here that I can size up and down like you can do with text boxes. Interestingly, the duration thing is a little clicker. That's terrible. I'm going to change that to be a different input style type. Just give it the number and do some validation on the number because nobody wants to do this. Although, can you edit it directly? Okay, maybe that's not so terrible. Fine. I might leave that. I don't know. I don't want to spend a ton of time on styling this thing. So we're going to not use form SP because for a few reasons. It's nice if you styled all of your stuff externally. And what I mean by that is if I like took this and said form and then said class equal form class, I don't know, and then had a separate CSS file that said everything that's inside of form class that is a paragraph tag or an input tag should look like this with this amount of padding and so on. That's not what Tailwind likes to do. Tailwind, the CSS framework that we're using, says, you don't actually style off in a separate style sheet. You style your stuff here in line. And you can see examples of that in this, let me save this, in this file over here. So you put these little utility classes on them and you bundle them together, and in these packages of classes and bundles of classes, it gives you all the control to define the styling that you want. And where you do want commonality later, you can extract that, but I'm choosing to make my Tailwind portion of this very simple right now. There's ways to optimize it and change the tool chain for it, but I've done the stupidest thing possible and just imported the whole thing from a CDN. So I don't get any of that customization stuff right now, but it's the trade-off that I'm willing to make for the project. So that just means that the as P thing that Django wants to put up by default is not going to be what we want. There are ways to tweak that. So in a Django form, you can specify the widget that we want. Like just a minute ago, you heard me grumble about this having this up and down thing. But that's only because it recognized it was an integer field. And for an integer field, it's trying to add this little, what it thinks is a helpful numerical widget. But you can change the widget. And in the process of changing the widget is what Django will use when it's rendering the HTML. So it's just a container for the HTML. And so you can add extra CSS classes there. So conceivably, I could define my own set of widgets and put those in my Python code. And then anytime I wanted to render a form, I could use as P, and it would render out the widgets appropriately. But I just don't really like that. I would much rather have control over the form and the structure over the form, and use the expected input names that Django expects, and the ones that we used in our test, in fact. If you look back at the test, it just needs names of description and duration. That's all it cares about. So that's a very easy form contract to adhere to. So as long as I do that, I can build that out myself and have a little bit more control. And that's one area of control that I'm happy to take on. Okay, so I think that will probably bring us to the end for the evening. Somebody commented on, I can't remember who it was, but someone commented on, like, are you going to spend time going over basic view creation and form creation. Here's an example of doing exactly that. There's a lot of that to do as we go through this project. There are just a lot of basic pieces that need to be in place. And last week's styling of this big view that has this big table of stuff and all of this like custom context that was needed as the main view of the site with a lot of rich information. That was one kind of thing that we need to do, but that'll actually be probably the exception than the rule. A lot of the stuff that we'll need to build out is the things that will go to these simple little forms that allow us to crank them out and add more data to the system. So that's where I'll probably stop for the night, and next time I don't know where I'll be. I said, like from where you saw me last week to this week, I'd made a lot of progress of adding a lot of navigation, a lot of features that were needed. The goal of me pushing so hard and so fast is my wife is trying to get off of this tool that she's currently using that's having some stability issues, and while she's still interested, I want to give her an out. So I'm trying to push hard, and even if that means that you all on the stream don't get to see the full story. But I think that we can dip in every once in a while and share a part of the process together, and still you can get a lot out of it. So thank you for joining in. I will, as always, post this stuff on YouTube. Oh, no problem, Hunter. Hope you've learned something new about programming. So I have social media stuff, and you can catch up with me. I'm MB Lehman on Twitter. If you are someone who has been watching a lot of these, oh, you're welcome, Osetta. Thanks for coming. And you want to support me financially and throw a few dollars my way, that's super helpful. I have a podcast that I said last week that I would be announcing last week, and for reasons that it included iTunes not approving my podcast immediately because it's a longer process, I didn't do that. So tomorrow you can expect a podcast announcement from me of something that's very much in the vein of Django's. It's a podcast all about teaching Django from the beginning, building up all of the core pieces that you would need to know, and that's something I'm doing. And I bring that up to say, like, if you want to support me on Patreon to help cover hosting costs, if that's cool with you, I would totally appreciate it. If you're not able to, that's fine too. It is something that I'm trying to provide to the Django community as a way that I can be helpful and share some of the knowledge that I've gained. Oreos and M&Ms work too, man. I'll see you in a couple of weeks. So that brings us to the end for tonight. Thanks for joining in, and I'll see you next week.